a mother of 6, and grandmother. Currently the founder and chair of Founded on Truth, which you can visit at foundedontruth.com. She has worked for the last 30 years as a citizen activist fighting in the trenches for life and liberty. During that time, she helped homeschoolers in Pennsylvania pass the laws they needed to educate their own children, sat on founding boards of the Pennsylvania Family Institute and the Pennsylvania Leadership Conference, founded an alternative to abortion service organization called Mom's House, worked as an advisor to President Reagan's Commission on the Family, and created the National Parents Commission to fight for parental rights and education. She is a nationally renowned education expert and has a wealth of knowledge to offer about Common Core. I know other groups have had her come in and speak on this issue, and I've heard excellent things, that she's the best out there on this issue. So please give a warm welcome tonight to Dr. Peg Luksik.
Here because I have to work the computer so that I can turn the pages, because I lost my clicker. Let me give you a little bit of information first. I would ask you to hold all your questions until the end, but other than some of the news that has surfaced in Maryland, when I do a town meeting or a forum, you can just stand up at the end and answer whatever you want. There's no censor, you don't have to submit it in writing. And I promise, as long as time permits, I will just answer in order. I don't know any of you, so I'll just kind of go around the room. All of the information that you are going to see tonight comes from government documents or publishing houses or newspaper articles about this issue. I didn't write any of the information that you are going to see. In many cases, you are going to be looking at Maryland's grant applications, either for one of 2 federal funding grants or flexibility, and they are applications that Maryland submitted to the federal government to either get money or permission. I use that for the same reason that when you go to the bank and get a loan and the bank says, how much is your income? And you say $100 and the bank says, that's really cute. Let me see your IRS tax return. Because you might lie to the bank, but you probably didn't lie to the IRS. When the state says to you, we're doing X, but in an official document that was signed by your governor or your secretary of education, or in some cases both, and then sent to the federal government, they didn't lie on that. So if on that document they say Y, and they told you they're doing X, they're doing Y. So I want you to always see the original documents. Some of the documents are more national in scope because they pertain to all the states, but as much as possible you are going to see everything that pertains specifically to your own state. You are filming. If you send me a copy, what I will do is put it on the Founded on Truth website, and underneath it, I will make all of the documents that we're referencing available for you to download so that you can print them off and have them for yourself and see where I got them and examine them, because it's kind of hard to read on a wall like this, okay? All right. The website, Founded on Truth. Now, this is a very long story, and it is either Democrat or Republican, but since I didn't think you wanted to be here all night, we're going to start with the current incarnation. And when this administration came to office, you probably remember that the stimulus bill was passed in 2009. Hidden inside the stimulus bill was a $53.6 billion appropriation to the Department of Education. It was the U.S. Department of Education. The money was to be made available to all the states. It was called the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund, and part of that fund was Race to the Top. Now, Race to the Top was only $4.35 billion of the $53 billion, so it's just a wee little piece of what the federal government made available. Now, in order to get the stabilization money, states had to say that they were making progress toward rigorous college and career-ready standards. Now, that word rigorous. Whenever Department of Education folks talk about the Common Core standards, they always begin with the word rigorous. They never don't say it, and they never use a synonym. That's a marketing technique. It's called the law of the seventh mentioning. You have to hear it 7 times before you even know you heard it. A number of years ago, I ran a congressional campaign, and we sent 6 mailers. So you got them one day after another, after another, after another. And then the next day, we called everybody. And the first person said, why did you mail me 6 things? That was such a waste of money. And the second person said, well, did you mail me anything? And the third person said, yeah, I think I saw one. That's the law of the seventh mentioning. 6 mailers and a phone call to get through. So rigorous is a marketing technique over and over and over again. And tonight we're going to see how rigor is defined. Additionally, the states had to say that they were going to establish pre-kindergarten to college and career data systems to be able to track the students. It was called a P through 20 system, P being pre-kindergarten, K through 12 being what you think. 13, 14, 15, 16 is the 4 years of college. 17, 18, 19, and 20 is moving, they follow the student, now adult, into the labor force. So it's a womb to tomb data system where we can track the individual before they even enter school all the way into the workplace. And we'll be looking at that tonight as well. Now, when the federal government gives grant monies, they always do like a packet that they send to all the states. For a number of years, I actually worked for the United States Department of Education, and I analyzed education reform initiatives for them. Meaning I'm one of the people who read all of these kinds of packets to say who got money and who didn't. I was on the who didn't get money stage. I was kind of on the lower end. It makes it easier if all of the applications look the same since you're reading hundreds of them. So the feds put together packets, and this is the packet for the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund. It had a front page on it, and in the front page, just like on your IRS form, it says, to the best of my knowledge and belief, everything in here is true and correct. And Maryland applied. Your governor and your Secretary of Education signed it in May of 2009, and that's their signature page where they applied for the Fiscal Stabilization Fund money. Now, as part of the application process, the state had to give the feds what were called assurances. We're going to do this. One of them was that you would establish a longitudinal data system that includes the elements described in the America Competes Act. The America Competes Act is federal legislation. So not only is the data system federally mandated that it exists, the federal government specified what it had to contain. There were mandatory elements. And every state, in order to get the stabilization money, had to comply to say that they were either had already or were in the process of establishing those elements. Additionally, they had to move toward the academic standards, and that was also mandated in the America Competes Act. So when you hear that this is a state-led initiative, well, as long as you ignore the fact that the federal government mandated it, you could say it was a state-led initiative, except it was a federally mandated one. Now, this was all very confusing for the states, and so the federal government actually put together training sessions that the state departments of education could send representatives to figure out, well, what is it that we have to do? These are the handouts, they were actually PowerPoint presentations that were used in the training sessions, which is why they say U.S. Department of Education on the bottom. The first thing that the feds talked about was how to put this education package together. Now, you notice it says cradle to career education plan. In other words, we're redefining the definition of education to mean career planning. And from the earliest stages, early learning stages, all the way through college, it's all one big package that is supposed to be seamlessly put together. So Common Core does not just impact K through 12. There's a pre-kindergarten component to it, and the colleges have been told to adjust their programming to make it match Common Core as well. And we'll see how that works tonight. Now, you notice they talk about rigorous standards, and it says literacy by 3rd grade. My kids could read at the end of 1st, and I'm sure some of you have a hair the color of mine, yours could as well. Now, what they talk about, and the feds told them from the very beginning, and in my state, what we hear all the time is, these are just standards. They have nothing to do with curriculum. They're just standards. That is educational poppycock. If my standard is that every child in my 3rd grade classroom is going to know their multiplication tables, and you walk into my 3rd grade classroom, what are you going to see the children learning? Multiplication tables. Because if the curriculum doesn't move to the standard is not worth the paper that it is written upon. So standards have to drive curriculum. And how do I know that that happens? Well, I use the assessments. If I set the standard and I control the test, then the curriculum is going to move to what is tested. Because that's how people get rewarded and punished, whether it's kids get promoted or teachers get evaluated or school districts get funding. So, and the feds told them that all the way back in 2009, that you have to align your curriculum with the standards. Now, in most states, and I've now been in a number of them, what they say is, well, yes, but you can have any curriculum you want as long as it matches the standards. The standard is that you have to match my chocolate cake. Do y'all see my chocolate cake here? It's a lovely chocolate cake. And the standard is that your cake has to taste like my cake and have the same texture as my cake. And the assessment is, I'm going to come and taste your cake. How many recipes can there be? One. One. If I control the standard and I control the test, I control the curriculum. In the end, there's one curriculum because there's one set of standards and one set of assessments. And the feds told them that all the way back in 2009. Now, how do they know that that's going to happen? Well, that's where the data systems come in. Now, data systems in and of themselves are a neutral topic. As a teacher in a classroom, every classroom teacher has a data system. It's called the grade book. So, when you come in and say, why did Johnny get an 85 in history because he had 100 in the test, the teacher opens the grade book and says, you didn't turn in any homework. There's 5 zeros here for homework. Aha, that's a data system. The problem with this data system is you probably didn't know that it existed before this all erupted. You don't know what's in it. You have no control over who's going to have access to it, and you can't opt out. Now we have a problem with the data system. So when we talk about the data systems, it's important to recognize that we're not talking about a teacher's gradebook. We're talking about a large system that tracks children and teachers all the way through the process, and you cannot control it. Now, the feds also told the states, okay, how do you implement this fiscal stabilization fund? And what they told them is start with your existing assessments, review them, use the monies in the middle, the ARA funds, that's the stimulus bill, American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. Title I. Title I is the granddaddy funding bill through which most federal money hits the states. So they've tied all of the Title I money into this process. The states then have to revise their assessments, send them to the federal government for approval, and then if you go down below the line. If you did all of those things, you could get the second half of your stabilization fund money. If you got it, the feds divided it into two and said you have to do everything above the line and submit it, and if we approve it, then you can get the second half. It was like a leash. Kind of like you tell a contractor, I'll pay you half at the beginning and half after you finish the job, and I inspect it to make sure you actually finish the job. Well, the feds did the same thing with all the states. You see, Race to the Top is at the bottom. States could not even apply for Race to the Top money unless they had approved applications for both phases of the state fiscal stabilization fund, meaning they had to move into the standards and they had to move toward the data system before they could even apply for Race to the Top money. So since we're talking about the data system, this is it. This is the state longitudinal data system. This document comes at the bottom. It says NCES. That's the National Center for Education Statistics. That is the federal housing for the data system. Although I will tell you, I looked at it yesterday morning and it's closed because of the shutdown. So right now they can't look at the data systems because they closed it. What the feds are telling the states is that the data system has to allow to connect from early childhood to post-secondary and labor, that it had to connect teachers and students. Why did they want to connect teachers and students? Because this isn't the first time the federal government has attempted to force their way into education. But in the past, experienced teachers went, somebody's getting their doctorate, this is stupid, closed their classroom door and did what worked, which meant that the federal agenda wasn't accomplished. So this data system links the teachers and the students. So we can see, okay, Mrs. Blankenschmill's class had these 30 kids. How did they do on the Common Core standards? How many times did Mrs. Blankenschmill access the computer system for the Common Core curriculum? Now we can hold her accountable. So it's a way to rope the teacher in and track the teacher as well as track the students. This data system has to provide access to the research community and public stakeholders. Now, there's a federal law called the Federal Educational Rights and Privacy Act that is supposed to protect the privacy of educational data. In 2010 into 2011, because it takes a while, the regulations around that law were rewritten to say that anyone with a legitimate educational interest could access the data. All they had to do was say that they had a legitimate educational interest, and the definition included vendors, people who sell product to the schools. All of this information is computerized. You've probably heard how Bill Gates is pouring tons of money, and he owns a company called Microsoft. Let me think. How could those things possibly be connected? He stands to make $1 billion off of this. Now, remember I said that the elements were mandated? Here's the mandated elements. It's right out of the America Competes Act. All of student enrollment information, that includes all your demographics. Name, address, zip code, birth date, gender, who do you live with? Do you live with a mom and a dad? Are you adopted? Do you live with foster parents? Do you live with your grandparents? Ethnic data. Have you ever been in a mental health situation? All the demographic data of the children is included in the enrollment information. Whether you graduated, transferred, or dropped out. State assessment scores, information on students not tested. In other words, maybe your child didn't take the state assessment. Well, then we go and get the information, including why your child didn't take the state assessment. College readiness, a teacher identifier system. Every teacher has a unique number, so we can track the teacher. All the information on the transcript, how they do in college. Ability to share data from preschool through college, and every child has a unique student identifying number. It's called a USID, unique student identifying number. This is the P through 20 system that we talked about, P through workforce. It includes early education data. We're now collecting data on the teachers, labor data, where do you wind up going to work, financial data, health data is included in the records. I did one presentation and somebody said, well, how would they get our financial data? Well, all the schools say you have to send these forms in to qualify for school lunch programs, and then a certain number of people are verified, meaning you have to send in your IRS tax return. And now they have your financial data, don't they? Maryland was awarded $879.8 million in state fiscal stabilization funds, meaning you complied with the things we just talked about because you got almost $880 million to do so. Now, at the federal level, there's a real pushback against Common Core. There's actually a bill that's been pushed through the U.S. House, H.R. 5, it's the Student Success Act. And whenever federal legislation is written, the caucus of the prime sponsor writes like this is what this legislation is about, like a cheat sheet, so you don't have to read the whole bill. This legislation was sponsored by a Republican, so it's the Republican caucus that wrote this, and they talk about Common Core, and what they said was, well, the Obama administration has used basically a carrot and stick approach in regards to Common Core. The carrot was, if you adopted Common Core, you could get Race to the Top money, but every state didn't get Race to the Top money. The stick was, if you didn't adopt Common Core, you had to continue to comply with the No Child Left Behind Act. Remember, not Democrat or Republican, that's both parties. So the No Child Left Behind Act was very draconian. It was impossible for schools to be able to comply, and the punishments were huge. So all the states wanted to get out of the No Child Left Behind Act. But the only way out was to say you were adopting Common Core. So the carrot was Race to the Top, and No Child Left Behind was the stick. Why did they want to get out of No Child Left Behind? Because No Child Left Behind said every state had to prove they had 100% proficiency in reading and math among all the students. Every single student in the state would be reading on grade level. Well, that's structurally impossible. There's no state that can possibly say that. And so the penalties were huge. And the penalties included that your school could be required to reopen as a charter school, and all of the staff would be replaced. So that was pretty big punishment. The states wanted to get out of it, and so they applied for flexibility. Maryland did. This is your ESEA flexibility application. It was submitted in February of 2012. It was updated multiple times. And so I looked at some of the changes, but they were mostly technical, so we're going to look at the base application because it's the easiest one to read. And it was signed by your chief state school officer, submitted online. And what they said was that beginning in the summer of 2002, Maryland departed from total local curriculum control to implement a statewide Maryland curriculum. So the idea that you have one curriculum for your state is not a new thing in Maryland, because back in 2002, that process already began, where the local districts lost control of the curriculum, and you were moving toward a statewide curriculum now almost 10 years ago. So in 2010, when they adopted the Common Core standards, it wasn't such a big jump to move to just taking your state curriculum and then making it compliant with Common Core, and that's what they did. They took your already existing state curriculum and then moved it so that it would match the Common Core standards. Now, since we're talking about the Common Core standards, and we keep hearing it's a state-led initiative, I thought we would look at the Common Core standards website. This is the Common Core standards website, and what they say is that the website and all of the property on it is owned by the National Governors Association Center and the Council of Chief State School Officers. So the Common Core is actually the property of two private entities. They weren't written by your state. They weren't written by any state. They were written by two private organizations who say that they are given to states to use under a license, but they're copyrighted to this group. Well, if they're copyrighted, if the government creates something, it cannot, by definition, be copyrighted because it's public domain. Taxpayer dollars funded it. So anything that was written by the government cannot be copyrighted. The fact that it is copyrighted is telling you that it was written by private organizations. And what they say is that the NGA Center and the Council of Chief State School Officers shall be acknowledged as the sole owners and developers of the Common Core standards, unless a state adopts them. And if a state adopts them, they don't have to tell anybody that they're actually owned by these two groups. They can say they did. They're exempt from acknowledging these two groups as the owners. That was in the state license. So the state could say, we did it, because this group gave them permission. Anybody else had to say that the Governors Association Center and the Council of Chief State School Officers were the authors and the publishers of the Common Core standards and that they were copyrighted in 2010. Now, I started looking at your new state curriculum framework, the one that they changed to make it match the Common Core state standards. And what struck me was that your state says that it emphasizes what's called universal design of learning principles. My original certifications are in special ed and elementary ed. I've taught everything from preschool through college, and I've taught pretty much every exceptionality over my 35 years of working with kids. So universal design of learning is actually a special ed principle. Most of us learn in pretty much the same way. Most of us are visual learners. Think about it. Somebody tells you something, and what do you say? Could you show me that in writing? I need to read it. If it gets in through my eyes, it's going to hit my brain. I'm going to be able to learn it the best. A small group are what are called auditory learners. I would rather hear it than see it. I have 6 children. One of them is, I only have one girl. She's a very good reader, but she actually prefers to learn auditorially, which is, we noticed from the time she was young, she's a classical ballerina. She's a principal dancer in a ballet company in Madison, Wisconsin. No wonder she likes to learn auditorially. She's a dancer, professional dancer. But it surfaced right away. But that is a smaller piece. And then there are some children who cannot learn by any of the traditional ways. And so you need to figure out how to get in past whatever blockages there are. Universal design of learning basically is a special ed approach to curriculum. What it says is we need multiple means of representation. In other words, not just visual. We're going to talk about it, maybe we'll do it tactily, we'll use all different media, we'll try to get in all different ways. Then we're going to provide multiple means of action and expression, because maybe you can't take a paper and pencil test. So I'm going to read the test to you and you can tell me the answers. Or we're going to let you act it out. Or you can build a project instead of taking the test. And we provide multiple means of engagement. In other words, we talk about it, we set it up, we give a lot of ladders to kids who can't really make it. All of which are very effective techniques for special education. But they do slow the process of learning down. It is way faster if you can learn visually and I can hand you the textbook and you can read it, comprehend it, and we move forward, than if we have to talk about 15 different ways for you to finally understand what that textbook says. So if you must adapt, you do adapt. But when you use these kinds of adaptation principles in every classroom, what you've done is you've slowed the process of learning down. And your documents actually say, well, we're actually educating on the margins. But that's not where most of our children live. And that's not how most of the world, whether it's in the educational circles or in industry, survives. So when we talk about this, I was really struck that Maryland is saying that your curriculum is actually structured around special education principles of learning. which is a much slower way of learning. If a kid needs it, wonderful that it's there. But if you don't, it's kind of like taking the top runner on your cross-country team and saying, we want you to run with crutches. Why would you do that to that child? But a kid who has a broken leg, crutches are great. But you're giving crutches to the top runners on your cross-country team, academically. So your process of education is being slowed down. You signed a memo. All the states had the opportunity to join what were called consortium. Groups of states that came together, some for curriculum development and some for testing. Your state joined PARC, which was the Partnership of Assessment for Readiness for College and Careers. So I went looking for what is PARC, because many states have joined it. They haven't all, but many states have. This is the base website. PARC is actually itself part of a consortium of groups. The lead group is called Achieve. Achieve is actually the organization that's behind the development of the Common Core standards. A lot of the money came from them. And they say, all students to graduate from high school ready for college, careers, and citizenship. So I looked at what your state did. And your state, Maryland, is a member, not just of PARC, you're a member of the American Diploma Project. So instead of it being a Maryland diploma or a Pennsylvania diploma or a Texas diploma, this is a group that says we're going to move toward an American diploma. In other words, nationalizing what happens in education. Your state is a member of the PARC Consortium, and your state is also a partner in the Next Generation Science Standards effort. Now, many states are not involved in that. That's Common Core in science, but Common Core now has such a bad name that we're calling it Next Generation. You should sit in front of you, use an example all the time. I'm so sorry. But we call it Next Generation Science Standards, and your state is a lead partner. So let's take a look at the science standards while we're here. The science standards were actually reviewed by Fordham. It's the Thomas Fordham Institute. They're a think tank that reviews a lot of stuff. Interestingly, they received $6 million from the Bill Gates Foundation to promote Common Core. So they liked the English and Math Common Core standards, but they didn't get any money to promote the science standards, so they actually just reviewed them and they gave them a C. And the reason that they gave them a C was they said it put a ceiling on the contents that will be measured at each grade. So this is all you need to learn. You don't have to go beyond that. They don't include math content. I don't know how you can teach physics without math, but they don't include math in the sciences. They're very confusing. They're vague, and they assume that the kids have learned things that they didn't actually teach, so you have all of this kind of lack of clarity at the upper grades. They said that the students focus on performing at the expense of memorizing. In other words, remember we talked about that universal design? So we're going to do lots of projects in the science classroom. When I traveled, I was in Tennessee last week, and one of the proponents stood up and said, well, when you walk into our classrooms, the kids are all engaged and they're happy and they're busy, but they're not learning anything. So if you walk into a science classroom, you might see, and one of the trainers said, well, for example, in a chemistry class, we take the periodic table and all of the children build models of all of the atoms in the periodic table with little balls and little sticks. And she said, and the brightest students were really very frustrated with that. They couldn't handle the rigor. No, they don't need to do 6-year-old arts and crafts. They actually could get what it meant from the periodic table and wanted to do more. And what the science standards do is you do a lot of those little projects instead of actually learning anything. They said they're heavy on practice, light on content. They said there's so little advanced content that it would be impossible to derive a high school physics or chemistry course from all of the content in the Next Generation Science Standards. You couldn't put together one high school physics class or one high school chemistry class. Everything is watered down, and so they'll need more remedial college courses. They won't be ready to go on to college. And you are a lead state in implementing these science standards. Now, you're also a member of PARC. This is PARC's website, and PARC, in talking about that, they're designing the assessments. It's a national assessment company, and there's two summative. A summative is like a final exam. That's the sum of all you've learned. And then there are two non-summative that you can take. They do English, they do math, and what they're trying to do is figure out where the kids are as you move forward. Now, the Park assessments say they're going to be based directly on the Common Core state standards. Remember we talked about at the beginning, standards, assessment, aligned curriculum? Well, Park says we're creating the assessments. Really wouldn't be fair if we didn't give you a curriculum. So if you look at the bottom in the highlighted part, the Park group has actually created model content frameworks. In other words, they've created a curriculum for folks to follow to pass the assessments. So I clicked on that. Since it was a link, what did it say? And what I found was, by grade 4, the students should be able to add and subtract multi-digit whole numbers using the standard algorithm. By grade 4. In traditional education, that is grade 2. This is by grade 4. So we've slowed the process down by 2 years. By grade 4, they can add and subtract using standard. An algorithm is, you know, you write the problem down and do what you need to do. By grade 6, they can divide multi-digit numbers using the standard algorithm. This is the culminating standard for several years' worth of work with division of whole numbers. This isn't fractions or decimals. By the end of grade 6, they can do a long division problem. That used to be grade 4.
With the calculator, right? With the calculator.
I actually went and looked at the Park assessment standards. In grade 3 and 4, they're not allowed to use a calculator, but starting in grade 6, they are. So they actually don't have to know how to divide. They just have to know how to push the buttons on the calculator. Because the Park assessments say starting in grade 6, they can use a calculator for the testing. That means it's not a math test. Okay? So that's the curriculum standards, and if the states, like yours, have entered into a consortium where they're all going to give the same test, then where is this curriculum going? Well, what we're seeing is it's 2 years behind. So I thought, well, I must have read that wrong. William McCallum is one of the folks who wrote the Math Common Core state standards, and while they were under development, he actually spoke at a national conference of math educators. And at the conference, the math teachers said, these are stupid. They're obtusely written. They are weird. They expect too much nonsense in the early grades. Not too much math. Too much stuff. What they say in the early grades is the children are supposed to decide, they're supposed to discuss why this is. So you're in 2nd grade, and the question is 2 plus 2 is 4, and the child is asked, now, why? And the 7-year-old goes, because it is. It just is. So it's extremely frustrating for them because they just look at it and put it together and move forward. And instead now we have to explain, and we're going to look at all different ways to do this, all different ways to build it. In one example, in one of the training sessions, and I've attended a bunch of them, it's a addition problem with thousands, and the little one, she draws boxes for the thousands, and then they're like plain, flats for the hundreds, and sticks for the tens, and little blocks for the ones, and she counts out all of them, and then tries to count them all together, and it takes almost 10 minutes. And finally, somebody says, well, here, look, do it this way. And she's done it in 35 seconds, but the answers don't match. And she doesn't know what to do. She's actually done the algorithm correctly, but counted all the little blocks wrong, because it's a lot of little blocks to count for a little one. And she missed one, and they're off, and now she's so frustrated she doesn't know what to do. But the children are told that those two things are equivalent. They don't get to the standard algorithm until much later. So in the early grades, they have all this extra stuff that frankly isn't even developmentally appropriate, because 7-year-olds do not think abstractly. They're very concrete little creatures, because they're 7. So when you ask them to do abstract conceptualization, they frankly cannot do it. Although the reality is, if I walked into any group of 100 adults and said, why is 2 plus 2 4? They would say, because it is. Mr. McCallum went on to say that, well, the Common Core standards had to be adopted because the federal government was saying in order to compete for the race to the top money, states had to agree to adopt them sight unseen. Your state did too. When you signed your Race to the Top grant application, the Common Core standards had not yet been completed. So your state and every other state said to Washington, we, fill in the blank name of the state, promise to tie every public school child in our state to educational standards that we have not yet seen. And that was responsible. Mr. McCallum also said, don't worry about it, the standards won't be too high, especially not in comparison with other nations, including East Asia, where math education excels. Remember that 2 years behind? These standards won't be too high. When I was in Tennessee, the gentleman from the Fordham Institute was there, and one of the senators said, so are these standards really good? And he said, well, compared to what they were, so we're spending billions of dollars to go from abysmal to horrendous. That doesn't really seem very intelligent, does it? He also said that the standards were done in a rush because he was being forced to do it by his bosses, the Governors Association, and they have been pressed by Secretary of Education Arne Duncan, who used the Race to the Top money as leverage to force the states to adopt the Common Core standards. So again, this is not a state-led initiative. This is a federal government-pushed initiative down into the states. Now, in February of this year, Trevor Packard, he's the new Senior Vice President of the College Boards, was asked about Common Core and math. And what he said is that AP Calculus sits outside of the Common Core. Calculus is not part of the Common Core sequence. In fact, the Common Core asks that educators slow down the progressions for math. And when we looked at the CAR curriculum, that's exactly what they did. Does anybody really think that in Singapore or Germany or Japan or Finland, they're slowing down the progressions for math? Then why are we doing it here? Now, Europe Park, we talked about them using the calculators. In the writing assessment, they said that the students will have access to certain word processing tools to write their essays. One that will be especially helpful is the spell checker feature. So they don't have to learn how to spell because they're going to be allowed to have spell checker because the assessments will be on a computer. Also, Park is saying that the tests themselves will be committed to universal design. So we'll have lots of project assessments, lots of alternative ways. Again, it's a special ed mechanism, but you're applying it to children who don't need the help. Park said that the test will cost, they're estimating that the test will cost $29.50 a student. That's higher than what you're currently paying in Maryland. That's actually quite expensive for testing. And the reason is that with all of these things being project-based and a lot of writing-based and all this, they're called constructive response, where the kids have to not just, it isn't that they do the math problem correctly, it's that they have to explain how they would do the math problem. So then somebody has to sit down and score that to decide, well, that costs a lot of money. You have to pay people to read all those tests and score them. Sadly, that's not a good use of money. When I was in grad school, one of my duties was actually ran a psychometric testing clinic at one university. So I know quite a bit about psychometric testing because I had to do that. When a test is valid and reliable, those are actually well-defined terms. They mean something. And one of the no-nos in valid and reliable assessment is human judgment in scoring. Did you ever watch the Olympics? And you see the ice skating, and 7 judges watch the same person do the same ice skating performance at the same time and give it 7 different scores. And those are all experts. And what the Olympics do is throw out the high one and the low one and average the rest to try to get something that's even slightly reasonable. But that's not what happens to your kids. What happens to your kids is the state and now Park hires a bunch of folks who don't necessarily have a great deal of training in the thing that they're measuring. They give them a guideline sheet and say, match the response to one of these things, figure out where, and then give them points based on what you think. Now, there's a lot of problems with that. One is you have no idea if the first evaluator measures like the second evaluator, just like the judges at the Olympics. As a teacher who's graded a whole bunch of papers, the person whose paper I scored at the beginning of the day got a very different scoring standard than the person whose paper I scored at the end of the day, because I was tired. Maybe everybody did really well, so I was in a good mood. Maybe everybody did really poorly, so I was in a bad mood by the end of the day. And any teacher worth their salt will tell you that that happens. But those tests are not called valid and reliable. And since the student knows the teacher, they can walk back in and talk about it. But in this system, you have no way of knowing if your paper was scored at the beginning of the day or the end of the day by somebody who's an expert in the field or not, somebody who's lenient or somebody who's harsh. But yet those scores follow your children. These tests by definition are not valid or reliable, but they're very expensive. Now, in Maryland, you guys actually defined, which this makes you unique in all the states, I will say. Your ESEA application for flexibility actually created a definition for what it means to be college and career ready. And they say a student who is college and career ready should be prepared to succeed in credit-bearing post-secondary introductory general education courses or an industry certification program. That's a community college. Introductory, post-secondary, general education courses. That's a community college. It doesn't mean you could go to MIT or the University of Maryland necessarily. It means you can go to a community college and take the lowest level courses. That's what it means. Or you could go into an industry training program. Then they said that you needed to be competent with skills for success, and again they gave a website that the child should have identified a career goal and be skilled in communication. So I looked at skills for success, and it was something that your state gave me, and they gave me a link, and so I went, and here's your skills for success. And skills for success were learning skills, thinking skills, communication skills, technology skills, and interpersonal skills. And these are all things that the state is saying they want to measure and teach and make sure that all the children meet the standard. So what are the standards? Well, one of the things that they talked about, they did this wheel, the context of high school assessment. I know it's very difficult to read because the document wasn't real clear. But at the very bottom in the dark box, it says learner rights. All students can learn. All students have the right to learn equally rigorous content. Can all students learn equally rigorous content? Of course they can. Stand up. Come on. Wiggle your little touchies while you're up there. A little bit of exercise is always good. Okay, this is vocal performance. When you can meet the standard, you can sit down, but you cannot sit down until you meet the standard. Are you ready? Luciano Pavarotti. Anybody who can sing as well as Pavarotti can sit down. Soloist with the New York Metropolitan Opera. Chorus member with the New York Metropolitan Opera. Soloist with the Regional Symphony. Chorus member with the Regional Symphony. Soloist with the church choir. Sings in the church choir. Sings in the shower and enjoys it. Can't carry a tune in a bucket. Can't find the bucket. Oh, wait, a bucket. Okay. Now, all students have the right to learn the same equally rigorous content. I am a teacher in a classroom. Everybody has to meet the same standards, same content. Where am I going to put that content? What is the level? Where did you all sit down? And sings in the shower and enjoys it. What is my job as a teacher in a classroom? To work with Mr. Can't Find the Bucket over there to get him up to sings in the shower and enjoys it. Because that way all the students will have learned the same equally rigorous content. But what about the child for whom the standard should have been Pavarotti?
That's right.
Now, when it's vocal performance, it's kind of amusing. Let's move that to math or science. And what about the child for whom the home front isn't strong enough to compensate for this lowering of what happens in the school front? There would never be another Dr. Ben Carson because his mom wouldn't have had a school to work with because everything would have been at the bottom. So when you say that all the kids have to learn all the same things, the first thing you're saying is you're lowering the standard. The second thing you're saying, I told you I have 6 children. My oldest son is an architect. He's a very successful architect. He is also Mr. Can't Find the Bucket. When he would sing in the shower as a kid, we would all pound on the bathroom door and ask him to please stop because it was so painful. My daughter is a classical ballerina. She is the mathematical equivalent of dyslexic. I homeschooled her for high school, and I gave her a math problem once, and the answer was how long would it take somebody to do something, and she brought me back a negative number. And I said, honey, time can't go backwards. And she said, well, no, Molly, did you get younger? No. Blank face? Okay, so math is definitely not your thing. Of the 4 boys that are left, 3 of them are engineers. The last one is an opera, he actually is an opera singer. When he was in the conservatory, he thought it would broaden his career chances if he took dance. So he took 4 semesters of dance in college, and at the end of the 4th semester, the professor came up to him and said, well, I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is, you are the hardest working student in the class. Thank you so much. The other good news, you are the most improved student in this dance program. Congratulations to you. The bad news is, you're abysmal. Please never take another dance class, ever, do not. I will give you a pass so I don't mess up your cue if you promise me you will never take another dance class ever in your whole life. And when he told me the story, he was laughing because he said, yeah, Mom, I'm abysmal. I can't do this at all. So, all students have to have the same equally rigorous content. What does that mean? For 3 kids in my own family, my architect's son, instead of studying design, would have to spend all his time going from can't find the bucket to sinks in the shower and enjoys it. My dancer daughter, instead of learning to do a quadruple pirouette, would spend all her time trying to figure out the time can't go backwards. And my opera singer son, instead of practicing his singing skills, would spend all of his time trying to move his dance skills from abysmal to horrendous. And who benefits from that? Nobody. See, in this system, we spend all of our time remediating your weakness to low average instead of allowing kids to pursue their strengths. It standardizes children, except they're not standard. They didn't come in one size fits all, so education can't be one size fits all without doing an awful lot of damage. And that's basically what this is saying, that we're standardizing the educational experience for every child. Now, it was a very long book, so obviously I didn't print all of it, but you can find it online if you like. I just looked at interpersonal skills. The student will work effectively with others and participate responsibly in a variety of situations. Which sounds really wonderful, except that's a function of your personality. What if you don't? I'm told that Thomas Alva Edison actually didn't work very well with others. Many inventors and artists don't. I myself have taught children that were just quiet. They really didn't want to be interactive. They learned everything they were supposed to learn. They learned to read and write and count, but they really didn't want to be a group member. My mother, who spends most of her time looking at me and going, oh, okay, because I'm about as outgoing as you can get, and my mother will openly say, when I was a kid, if I had to stand up and say a poem, I stood up and said, I'm not prepared because I so didn't want to speak in front of a class. But my mom's a very competent woman. She just doesn't particularly like to do public speaking. She's just really quiet. Doesn't she have a right to be? Yes. In your, these are the things that the student will. I was particularly struck by the student will contribute personal resources to group activities. They will identify personal resources, including knowledge, skills, materials, space, and time. They will offer personal resources. They will assess the usefulness of personal resources. Is it the business of the school to force a child to contribute to something? When did that happen? It went on to say that the student will function as a responsible citizen, and then they have a great deal of information to meet that outcome as well. You will participate in democratic decision-making processes, you'll work with the groups, you'll be part of the group. Everything is about being a good group member in this system. And that is now part of the required outcomes. Your definition of Common Core includes this in your state. So your state's very open about the fact that being a good group member is part of what they're looking for in Common Core. I have a naysayer back here saying, I don't like that at all. You're not being a good group member.
I've been in the school system for 15 years, and there's no way they're going to get some of these kids to stand up or sit in their desk and participate and do this. There's no way.
No way, exactly.
No way.
And in some cases, they have a right
I
not
work with
to.
special ed, and
Then
I'm
you know.
in the classroom with my special ed students. I'm a paraprofessional, okay? And I do just about what every teacher does. I do the teacher's job, okay? Because I take the kids out of the classroom, and I'm sorry for interrupting, but
No, go ahead.
and I give the test. I give the test
Right,
to the kids, and
it's not the same.
it's not going to work. There's no way. They need to go back to this old way of, I'm embarrassed that the kids don't know the the states, the capitals, how to do
No,
math.
they don't. It's really
They
sad.
count-
They're
I'm in
losing
high school.
academic knowledge.
Sorry, they count on their fingers.
You're right, you're right. That's okay, that's okay. It goes on to talk about, and we talked about a good community member, that the student will plan and act in supportive communities. So again, they're very open in this, in your documents, that being a good community member is part of what is required for Common Core, including giving personal resources to match specific needs. So being a good community member and being that the state can come in and say, we need your personal resources, something that is being pushed down all the way into, and this is a K through 12 module that they're talking about. Now, your state also didn't just get the Common Core grant. Your state actually got the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge grant. You got it in December of 2011. It was $50 million to move down. Remember I said pre-K all the way through careers as we saw in the first slide. So the federal government is making money available to encourage states to move down into the pre-kindergarten level. Your state did 10 projects. I know you can't see that. We're just going to pick a couple of them to look at. Project 6 was your comprehensive assessment system. We begin assessing children from birth. There's a kindergarten entry assessment, and then we have professional development to do this. So we've got formative assessments from birth to 36 months, then additional assessments from 36 months to 72 months, and then we're revising your kindergarten entrance assessment. And it's all created to make it so that we can do we linkage to reporting to the database. So we report, the assessment isn't just like, but my youngest sister, she's 15.